Good evening and welcome to MTP Daily and welcome to a big primary Tuesday, the last really big one of the year. I'm Chuck Todd here in Washington. Voting is happening right now in Arizona and Florida. Two big-name senators are on the ballot. And if maybe a year ago we would have thought both could have primary problems. And if you thought today was going to cause a sea change in American politics, but think again, the presidential primary season was one of the most heated in recent memory, bringing new voters in. Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders dubbed their candidacies movements or revolutions, respectively. But today, on this last giant primary day of the year, where is that revolutionary fiver? Where's the movement? Where are those new voters that Sanders and Trump said we're going to change the system, upend politics as we know it, and just knock the living daylights out of incumbents left and right in Washington? Well, as voters in Florida and Arizona head to the polls today, some of these contests do pit some grassroots against the establishment, but that revolution is a trickle down the ballot these days. Kelly Ward in Arizona is running a Trump-like campaign against Senator McCain. And in Florida, Marco Rubio has reluctantly embraced the top of the party's ticket after a blistering back and forth, of course, in the presidential primary. But even before Donald Trump began rallying fed-up Republicans, groups like the Senate Conservatives Fund were threatening to oust GOP incumbents this cycle. A number of well-known Republicans about 18 months ago in the Senate were thought to have tough populist or Tea Party challengers. Well, they've dispatched with them handily. Burr, Portman, I can tell you that's Roy Blunt, Jerry Moran. There were a lot of talk, even about Corker. And while Kelly Ayotte does still have a primary in September, just like Rubio today, she's likely to win it easily. And of the four incumbents who have lost in the primary this cycle, the only one that was an ideological race at all was won by the establishment-type candidate over a Freedom Caucus member of Congress, Tim Huelskamp. By the way, the other three primary losses this year in this revolution and movement on the left and right, they were all House members. Two lost because of redistricting and another because of corruption. If current polling holds, tonight's contest will again show that the establishment incumbents are doing just fine in Donald Trump's Republican Party. And on the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders has been mostly silent. He'll campaign solo for Hillary Clinton for the first time on Labor Day in New Hampshire. But while he is leveraging his huge email database from the primary to help fundraise for a few Senate nominees, the only race he was truly vocal about was Tim Canova in Florida, a race he jumped into mostly out of disdain for the former DNC chairwoman, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who happens to be the incumbent member of Congress from that district. Doesn't sound like a political revolution now, does it? Joining me now is Nina Turner, NBC political analyst, who was one of Sanders' most vocal supporters, and Rick Tyler, an NBC political analyst as well, who served on Ted Cruz's campaign during the beginning of this primary season. Welcome to both of you. Both of you, I do not consider members of the political establishment. You both have sort of fought your way into it. Okay? So I give you that. Nina, let me start with you. You know, Bernie Sanders talked about it all the time. But when push came to shove, he didn't endorse John Fetterman in Pennsylvania. He didn't endorse Sittenfeld in Ohio against Ted Strickland. He didn't go for the new people, progressives on the left. He played it safe and worried about his own campaign. How does that start a revolution?
Oh, Chuck, no, I think that's a little harsh. I mean, the senator
I'm being a little harsh, you're right. But he didn't get involved in the primaries.
But he did, you know, he was running a little race of his own called running for the presidency of the United States of America. But he did do some things that I hadn't seen any other presidential candidate do while they were running, which is to embrace candidates from the local level, state level, and also the federal levels of government. And in terms of revolution does not happen overnight. And Chuck, as you may recall, the data that at least from 2014, when Congress had about a 9% or 11% approval rating, yet 96% of those incumbents were re-elected. And so that is really the tension here about a concern that voters may have about the Congress as a whole. But as we know, they tend to like their own congressperson. And so it's hard. Revolutions take years. We're not going to relent on this. It's going to take some time.
No, I hear you. And I guess what I'm surprised at, Rick, is there was an unsettled primary electorate in both sides, okay?
That's right.
The Sanders supporters were outsiders looking to cause upheaval, wanting to challenge the status quo. Trump folks, and frankly, a lot of Cruz supporters, same thing. We're looking to challenge the establishment, challenge the status quo. Why didn't that trickle down this year?
Well, I think if Bernie Sanders had won, I think he might be looking at a different race. But it is an interesting twist in what has been an extraordinary year. And on the Republican side, I think that the Donald Trump supporters, and I do think a lot of them are new, but I don't think they're actually savvy about politics the way that the Tea Party was. The Tea Party was sort of a revolution, and they did engage, and they got involved in the races up and down the ticket. I don't see that happening with Donald Trump supporters. So when I look at the Senate races, it looks like, to me right now, it looks like the Republicans will probably hold the Senate. I don't see a big upheaval down ballot.
But you're holding it. But Rick, you're holding it with people that look. I remember having conversations with folks that had been involved in sort of the conservative movement to challenge these guys. Portman is no friend of some of these grassroots conservatives. Roy Blunt is somebody that's unpopular with these folks. Richard Burr, and yet they let him go this cycle and put their energy behind both Cruz and Trump.
It's very true, and I think if Cruz were on the top of the ticket, it would be very different. But again, I think the Trump supporters are a little bit different. That they aren't as plugged into the down ballot races, and so it is hard to explain because all of the Trump supporters definitely want a revolution, definitely want to change. But it looks like they're going to return everybody back to Congress, or most of them anyway.
Nina, it seems to be the same thing on the Democratic side. I mean, and I guess let me ask you this: why? I'll ask about Ohio. That's your home state. Mm-hmm. Why didn't the Strickland primary, why didn't that primary take off, in your opinion?
I mean, look, Governor Strickland was the governor of the great state of Ohio. He was a congressman. And so there was not that much of a focus on that race in particular. But in terms of, and I know that Portman, I think Senator Portman has about an 8 percentage point lead over the governor right now. But, there's still a little time left between now and November. I think the governor can have an upset there. But in terms of Senator Sanders, I mean, he really did show that these candidates in these races, that, Chuck, in other words, it's bigger than just the presidency of the United States of America. Yes, both sides want that, but in order to have a real revolution, you have to field candidates on the local, state, and federal levels of government, and there has not been anybody who has done that in such a strategic way, and that is really what our revolution is about. But revolutions do not necessarily happen overnight. Of course. They have to take time, and that's what we're seeing here. And Chuck, we cannot forget, again, I can't overemphasize the point, as you know, the data shows, your data man, that incumbency in the Congress is a very powerful thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's why, I guess, let me ask your opinion, though, Nina, as to why in the states where Bernie Sanders would do well, it'd be one of these back and forths, that you didn't see progressives down the ballot sort of ride his coattails to victory in some of these primaries. And I think some of us thought that was going to happen. And we haven't seen it with Trump either. I mean, there's been a disconnect between the presidential and everything else.
I know, but again, we're tapping into an awakening. One thing we can say about 2016, this has been an extraordinarily different year, especially within the primaries of both parties. But it takes time to tap into this. I want to say this is not over. This is just one election cycle. What this really is about is getting people to continue to focus year after year after year after year. That is how you build a revolution. And I got to say, a Democratic socialist from Vermont, he did not do a bad job.
Well, I hear you there. Rick, let me ask you this. What should Senate incumbents, if you're Mitch McConnell right now, you sit there and say, hey, he may look at it and say, we've cracked the code. We've avoided all of the problems. Well, we don't know exactly what McCain's going to happen tonight, but let's assume McCain does survive tonight. Yeah. He's going to say, hey, we've cracked the code, and Portman survived, and Burr survived, and Paul, none of these people had to deal with these things. Does this mean they're out of the woods?
I think, well, look, I don't think they'll be out of the woods. I mean, there's a lot of speculation about turnout this fall, and I don't know. There's a lot of things could happen this fall. My sense is that McCain will be fine and Rubio will be fine, and that there's been so much attention on the the Clinton Trump race that it has just overwhelmed the lower races. We don't have a race nationally really to focus on. Nobody's talking about the Senate race. Very few are talking about the Senate race. The Democrats could pick up a few seats, but they're going to need to pick up at least 3 if Trump wins. They'll have to pick up 4. Right now, it doesn't look like Trump is going to win to me. And if the margin gets to be too high, that is around 10 points, that could really affect turnout. But on the one hand, you've got Clinton on one side, who really represents the establishment, and that sort of was a little bit discouraging, I think, to the Bernie supporters. And on the other side, that Donald Trump has been losing so badly, I think it's been discouraging to the Republicans.
Nina, let me give you the last question here. What should be the test in 2018 for the Sanders revolution? How will we know that the seeds he planted in 2016 are sprouting in 2018?
The continuation of the winning of races from school board all the way up to the state legislature and statewide races. And that doesn't mean we're going to win every single race. That doesn't mean that the revolution is going to win every single race. But the fact that people are tuning in, the fact that people, and let's use Tim Canova, Chuck, for one example. I mean, that race is not over tonight. I know what the polls are saying. But my God, he raised low dollar, with almost $3 million, low dollar grassroots money. That is one test. Having people awaken and involved and engaged like never before. That's one test. So I would argue that just simply winning elections in and of itself is not the only test. It's one of many tests. But we got to keep people awakened in this thing, Chuck, and we're going to keep doing that.
I hear it's one of only, but I would say it's the most important.
I knew you were going to say that.
At the end of the day, you have your midterms.
More people running.
Those are good tests. The pop quiz are good tests. But you better get that final exam right on election day.
We're working on it. It's going to take time.
Nina Turner, Rick Tyler, fun conversation. Thank you both.
Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you.